So we're looking at solving rational equations. So just in looking at the process, today we're going to look at how to solve rational equations. So step one, we're going to factor the denominators if necessary, determine the least common denominator and domain restrictions, multiply each term by the least common denominator to cancel out the denominators, and solve the remaining equation to find x. So in looking at our first equation, we have 15 divided by x plus 1 equals 3. Well, we need to get x plus 1 out of the denominator. So our least common denominator here is x plus 1. Also, in the denominator, we can't make 0. So if x equals -1, the denominator 15 divided by 0 would be undefined. So our domain restriction, x is not equal to -1. So what we're going to do is multiply both sides of this equation by x plus 1. So we have 15 divided by x plus 1. And we're going to times that by, I'm going to put parentheses here, x plus 1. And then equals 3, and then times x plus 1. So in the denominator here, that's going to cancel. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to get 15. And over on the right, I'm going to go ahead and write 3 parentheses x plus 1. Now, most of you would probably distribute, but you can actually divide by 3 to start. So 15 divided by 3 is going to make 5. 3 divided by 3 will make 1. So I can bring down my x plus 1. And then I can undo the x plus 1 by subtracting 1 on both sides. And we get 4 equals x, or x equals 4. So now what I would like for you to do is pause the video, and on your assignment, do problem number 1, A, B, C, D, and problems 3A and 3B. So for example B, what we need to do is find a common denominator. And I notice that the denominator here is in standard form, and we're going to move it to factored form by factoring. So we have 1 divided by, well, I'm looking for factors of positive 30 that add together to be -11. So I'm just going to try -6 and 5, and that ends up working. So we have x minus 6 times x minus 5 equals 1 over x minus 6 plus x over x minus 5. So what we're going to do is make all the expressions have a common denominator of x minus 6 and over x minus 5. So multiplying the first part, 1 over x minus 6, I'm going to multiply that by x minus 5 in the numerator. And then that's going to, in the denominator, have x minus 6 times x minus 5. And in the numerator of the second one, we have an x minus 5, but I'm going to multiply by x minus 6. And then I'm going to take the x and then also multiply that by the x minus 6. And then that's going to equal 1 over x minus 6 times x minus 5. So my least common denominator here is going to be x minus 6 times x minus 5. And my domain, x is not equal to 6, and x is not equal to 5. So then what I'm going to do is I have x minus 5 in the numerator plus x times x minus 6. And then combining that with a single numerator, I have x minus 6 times x minus 5 is equal to 1 over x minus 6 times x minus 5. Now what I'm going to do here is multiply both sides of that equation by x minus 6 times x minus 5. Essentially, what that's going to do is just cancel the denominators out. So I'm going to rewrite the equation without the denominator. X minus 5 plus, and then here I'm going to distribute. X squared minus 6x is equal to 1. Now I'm going to rearrange the equation. So I have x squared, cross it out. Negative 6x plus 1 is minus 5x. Cross it out. And then I have minus 5, but I'm also going to minus the 1 over to the other side. So on the right-hand side, that's going to be 0. Negative 5 minus 1 is going to be minus 6. So now I'm going to factor x squared minus 5x minus 6. That factors into x minus 6 times x plus 1 equals 0. Then I'm going to use the zero product property and say, well, x minus 6 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. And then I'm going to solve. So I'm going to add 6 and x equals 6. Then I'm going to subtract 1 and subtract 1 and x equals negative 1. So my two solutions here are x equals 6 and x equals negative 1. So now what I would like for you to do is go ahead and complete the rest of the assignments. We're going to do a couple more examples if you need more practice, but if you feel ready for the assignment, you can start now. So in looking at this equation, I notice I'm going to have to factor here. So x squared minus 5x plus 6, that's going to be 1 over x minus 3 times x minus 2. And then here we have x over x minus 2 plus 1 over x minus 3. So our least common denominator is x minus 3 times x minus 2. And then what I'm going to do is find a common denominator. So in this expression, I need to multiply the numerator and denominator times x minus 3. And then in this expression, I'm going to multiply by x minus 2 over x minus 2. So x minus 2 times 1 is just x minus 2. And then the denominator stays x minus 2 times x minus 3. And then that's equal to 1 over x minus 3 times x minus 2. Then I'm going to combine that with the single numerator here. And I'm actually going to distribute as well. So x times x is x squared minus 3x plus x minus 2 over x minus 2 times x minus 3. And then equals 1 over x minus 3 times x minus 2. Now, a couple things for the domain. X cannot equal 2 and x cannot equal 3 because we'd have division by 0. So I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by x minus 2 times x minus 3, and that's actually just going to drop the denominator. So cleaning up the numerator, I have x squared minus 2x minus 2 is equal to 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and we have x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. And now what I'm going to do is factor. So I'm looking for factors of negative 3 that add together to be negative 2. So I have x minus 3, so it's going to be negative 3 and 1, and x plus 1 equals 0. So now what I'm going to do is use that zero product property to solve. So x equals 3, because x minus 3 is 0, would give me the equation x equals 3. And setting x plus 1 equal to 0 would give me x equals negative 1. Now, in looking at this, one of the domain restrictions is x cannot equal 3. So that is not a solution. So what we're going to do now is look at our graph. So to solve this on a TI calculator, I'm going to have to take this side of the equation and put it in for y equals. So to get that fraction, you can press alpha x, and then you can do x over x minus 2, and then plus, and then alpha x, and then 1 over x minus 3. And then the second equation, I can put that in as you see it. So alpha x, 1 over x squared minus 5x plus 6. Then I'm going to graph both. And I can see I have an asymptote here at 3, so they're never going to cross. And the equation is crossing at -1. So there's what my graph looks like. And I would sketch that, but you can see the picture here. There's one solution at x equals -1. So now we're going to do another example here. So I'm going to factor x squared minus x first. So that's 5 over x times x minus 1. And then minus 5 over x minus 1. And then that equals 4 over x. And I can see that my LCD is x times x minus 1. And then my domain restrictions, well, if x to make 0, x cannot equal 0. And if x is 1, so we would also make 0 there. So to multiply to get my LCD, I don't need to do anything here. So I'm going to have 5 over x times x minus 1. And then minus, I'm going to multiply by x here on both sides, so 5x, and then times x minus 1. And then that's 4 over x, and then times x minus 1. So in the numerator here, we have 5 minus 5x over x times x minus 1 is equal to, and I forgot over here to put the x minus 1 in the numerator, so x minus 1. And I'm going to distribute that as well. So I'm going to go 4x minus 4 over x times x minus 1. Then I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by x times x minus 1. And we get 5 minus 5x equals 4x minus 4. And I'm going to solve for x on the left. So I'm going to minus 4x and minus 4x. Also, I'm going to get rid of that 5 by subtracting 5. So 5 minus 5 makes 0. Negative 5x minus 4x is negative 9x. 4x minus 4x is 0. Negative 4 minus 5 is negative 9. Then I'm going to divide by negative 9 on both sides and get x equals negative 1. And for my domain restriction, actually up here, if I look at that, negative 9 divided by negative 9 makes positive 1. I'm sorry. X equals 1 is not a solution. So x equals 1 is a solution, but this is a domain restriction. So there can actually be no solutions. So the most common mistake here is to just solve and forget looking at your domain restrictions and think that there is a solution. So let's look at the graph. So if I go y equals and clear everything out from my previous problem, and we're going to put this into the left-hand side of the equation. So alpha x is going to be 5 over x squared minus x and then minus alpha x 5 over x minus 1. And on the second one, we just have alpha x 4 over x. And the first equation is going to be in blue. The second one is going to be in red. So as I graph those, I see that those equations never intersect.